Hey guys, tonight we settle into a tale of crowns, candles, and a queen who, against all odds, managed to steer an entire nation through storms of faith without capsizing. Imagine this. The year is 1558. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and uncertainty, and a young woman steps out of the shadows into the dazzling but perilous light of monarchy. That woman is Elizabeth Tudor, just 25, with flame-bright hair and a crown that's far heavier than it looks. You watch her face a realm split right down the middle, Catholics on one side, Protestants on the other, and everyone sharpening arguments, or weapons, depending on the day. It's almost funny, if you can call it that, because her throne isn't a velvet cushion. It's more like a tightrope strung between bonfires. And yes, you probably won't survive this walk if you were her, but somehow she does. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. It's like a little map of sleepy travellers stretched across time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice, as Elizabeth takes the throne, is how freshly stained the ground beneath her shoes feels with the blood of the past 2 decades. Her father, Henry VIII, had ripped the kingdom from Rome. Her brother Edward had driven reform harder, like a teenager with new toys. Then Mary, Bloody Mary to her enemies, tried to stitch Catholicism back with flame and martyrdom. By the time Elizabeth sits in the coronation chair at Westminster, England isn't just divided, it's dizzy, spinning between extremes. Ordinary folk are exhausted, muttering that they don't care what's said at the altar as long as they can just keep their jobs and avoid the stake. You feel Elizabeth's pulse quicken in that vaulted space, incense curling up to the rafters. She knows she's not just inheriting a crown, she's inheriting a religious mess that could explode at any sneeze. Historians still argue whether she truly had a master plan from the beginning, or whether she was simply winging it with brilliant instinct. Either way, she projects calm. That was her gift, never letting the tremor show. The coronation itself becomes a kind of hint at what's to come. She refuses a crucifix at her side, yet she wears robes that glimmer with old Catholic grandeur. The balance is delicate, like when you order both fries and a salad and hope no one notices the contradiction. People do notice, of course, but they're not sure what it means yet. That's the beauty of ambiguity. Everyone can project their hopes onto it. In the streets outside, London hums. There are bells, trumpets, cheering crowds clutching their caps. You see faces glowing with optimism, others shadowed with suspicion. Some whisper prayers to the Virgin Mary, others recite verses from the Geneva Bible under their breath. Elizabeth must carry all of them. That night, as torches burn down and the city quiets, you can almost hear her exhale in her chamber. One day down, infinite storms ahead. But it isn't just politics. It's personal. Remember, she's Anne Boleyn's daughter. That ghost lingers too. Her mother was branded a heretic and executed, her memory tied to Protestant leanings. For Elizabeth, every choice feels like tugging on threads already tangled. A smile to the wrong bishop could trigger gossip. A sigh in chapel could spark a pamphlet. In a kingdom of spies and sermons, even silence is dangerous. And yet there's humour in her restraint. She once quipped that she had no desire to make windows into men's souls. Imagine her, raising an eyebrow at the endless squabbles over Latin phrases. To her, the faith of her people mattered, but their loyalty mattered more. It's the kind of sly wisdom you'd expect from a queen who learned early that speaking less sometimes says more. Picture yourself walking with her through Whitehall's long galleries. The tapestries glimmer with biblical scenes, candles flicker on gilt stands, and her courtiers trail in a hushed swarm. She smiles, jokes lightly, keeps them guessing. She knows appearances are everything. Every gesture is political theatre, every pause a strategy. Even the way she holds her prayer book, open but unread, becomes a message. And yet, beneath that show, you can feel her private weight. She's young, single, vulnerable to foreign suitors and local rivals. To balance religion is also to balance survival. Any wrong tilt could give Spain an excuse to invade, France a reason to meddle, or English factions a spark for rebellion. No pressure, right? Just the small matter of holding Europe's gaze while walking that flaming tightrope. By the time you settle into her first year, you realise this balancing act isn't temporary. It's the story of her entire reign. Elizabeth's England is a land where compromise is power, where clever silences matter as much as decrees, and where one woman's instinct becomes the anchor for millions of restless souls. You slip deeper into Elizabeth's world, and suddenly the shadow of her mother stretches long across the candlelit halls. Anne Boleyn, the woman who turned a king's head and changed the course of England's faith, lingers in whispers and sideways glances. For you, walking at Elizabeth's side, it's impossible not to feel how that ghost presses down. Her mother's fate, accused of treason, adultery and witchcraft, then beheaded on Tower Green, hangs over every prayer Elizabeth utters. When she kneels in her private chapel, you sense that she's not only praying to God, but also quietly negotiating with memory. Her very legitimacy as queen is shaky to many. Remember, Henry VIII's marriage to Anne Boleyn was declared void by Catholics, which means Elizabeth is technically illegitimate in their eyes. That word, bastard, buzzes around court like a fly you can't quite swat. Even when she wears the crown, some bishops murmur that she has no divine right to rule. It's the cruel irony. The very religious question that toppled Anne Boleyn still haunts her daughter 2 decades later. You watch Elizabeth move through court with studied poise, but her sharp eyes never miss a flicker of doubt. Historians still argue whether she carried bitterness about her mother's death into her policies, or whether she deliberately tried to detach herself from that tragedy. What's certain is that she never forgot. She kept a jewelled locket ring with a tiny portrait of Anne hidden inside, pressed close to her skin. Imagine that, carrying a miniature ghost in your jewellery, the kind of secret talisman that whispers, never forget where you came from, and never trust too quickly. Anne Boleyn's reputation, of course, is a battlefield all its own. To Catholics, she was the temptress who lured Henry into schism. To Protestants, she was a martyr who paved the way for reform. For Elizabeth, she was both wound and weapon. Her enemies tried to stain her with her mother's scandal, but she also used Anne's Protestant associations when it suited her, hinting that her bloodline tied her to the godly cause of reform. That's Elizabeth's genius, turning liabilities into shields. You trail her down a long corridor hung with Tudor roses and Boleyn badges, falcons with outstretched wings. She doesn't erase these symbols, she lets them remain. It's like walking through a memory garden where each emblem reminds her courtiers, yes, I am Anne's daughter, and no, I'm not ashamed. Even if she doesn't say it aloud, her silent confidence reframes the narrative. Still, the risk is constant. European courts gossip endlessly about her mother's downfall. Letters from Rome drip with disdain. Ambassadors report home that Elizabeth's very blood is tainted with heresy. You can almost hear her sigh in the privacy of her bedchamber, tired of being judged not just for what she does, but for who her mother was. It's like being stuck in a family scandal that never ever dies down, except the whole continent is watching. Yet there's a quirky, almost ironic twist in how this plays out. Some Catholics trying to undermine Elizabeth actually whisper that maybe Anne Boleyn wasn't Elizabeth's mother at all, that she was secretly swapped at birth, or that Henry had other liaisons. These rumours are absurd, of course, but they reveal just how desperate people were to explain away Elizabeth's power. It's the Tudor version of a conspiracy theory, and you half expect someone to draw a map on parchment with red ink strings connecting suspects. The truth, though, is that Elizabeth embraced her mother's cleverness as much as her scandal. Like Anne, she wielded charm like a dagger. She could flirt with ambassadors, disarm bishops with wit, and hold her counsel in the palm of her hand. If Anne had survived, you imagine mother and daughter might have been eerily alike, fiery, quick, dangerously intelligent. That likeness alone must have unnerved her enemies. And when Elizabeth speaks in Parliament, her words ring with a rhythm that feels inherited. She declares that she is married to her people, echoing Anne's defiance in court when she refused to bow quietly. You see the threads connecting them. Two women navigating a man's world with language as their weapon. At times, though, you catch a softer note. Elizabeth doesn't talk about Anne openly. How could she? But in quiet gestures, in her careful balance of religion, you sense a daughter honouring a lost mother. Maybe, just maybe, her decision to steer a middle course between extremes isn't just political strategy, it's personal. After all, Anne was condemned by Catholic judges, but she also alienated hardline Protestants. Elizabeth, walking that dangerous line, almost seems to be whispering, I won't let my mother's mistakes repeat. And yet, the irony persists. the very mother who shaped Elizabeth's destiny could have undone her completely. Without Anne, there would be no Elizabeth. But because of Anne, Elizabeth's crown was never secure. You linger with that paradox, watching her smile at a court mask, laughing lightly while her mind surely hums with the weight of inheritance. So, as you follow Elizabeth into her early reign, you can't escape Anne Boleyn's presence. She's there in the locket ring pressed against Elizabeth's finger. She's there in the whispers of legitimacy. She's there in the fire of Elizabeth's speeches and in the stubborn resolve that never lets her blink first. A mother gone too soon, but still shaping a daughter's throne. You move with Elizabeth now into the early chambers of power, where every candle flickers over parchments and prayer books that could decide life or death. This is where she makes her first great gamble, choosing the middle way. You watch her sit among her advisors, her hands resting on the carved oak arms of her throne, and you can sense the calculation behind her calm expression. England is exhausted from whiplash, swung between Protestant zeal under Edward and Catholic revival under Mary, and the people crave peace, even if they don't know what kind. Elizabeth's brilliance is realizing that a compromise, however fragile, might actually hold. So she begins weaving what will become known as the Elizabethan religious settlement. On the surface, it's simple. The country will officially lean Protestant, but with enough Catholic flavour to keep hearts from rebelling too loudly. Beneath the surface, though, it's a dance of contradiction so subtle you almost laugh. The liturgy is Protestant, but the rituals retain Catholic echoes. The monarch leads the church, but she softens the title to Supreme Governor, avoiding the more inflammatory Supreme Head. It's the kind of semantic twist you'd expect from a queen who knew the difference between a crown staying on her head or rolling in the straw. As you lean in, you notice how Elizabeth frames her approach not as a choice between extremes, but as common sense. She argues that people don't need their souls dissected at the altar. No desire to make windows into men's souls, she quips again, with that sly smile. You almost picture her holding a paintbrush over a stained glass window, deciding to leave it opaque. After all, if no one can peer through, everyone can pretend their own view fits. And yet, it isn't all smooth sailing. Her advisors squabble like crows over scraps. Some push for bolder Protestant reform, insisting that ambiguity is weakness. Others warn that Rome's fury will scorch them if they cut too deep. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth truly believed in this middle ground, or if she simply used it as a political survival strategy. Either way, the result is the same: a settlement that doesn't make anyone perfectly happy, but doesn't drive them immediately to revolt either. You hear the voices of ordinary villagers carried up from the countryside. They whisper in alehouses and markets. So what are we now? Protestant? Catholic? And the honest answer is, a bit of both, depending on who's asking and whether spies are listening. For many, it's enough to have a service in English, to kneel on wooden benches without worrying about bonfires built in town squares. For others, it's maddening, a halfway house that feels more like limbo than faith. The quirk here is that Elizabeth uses music and ritual as her secret weapons. The new Book of Common Prayer is deliberately worded so Catholics can interpret the Eucharist one way, and Protestants another. The hymns echo with familiar cadences, letting worshippers hum old tunes with new words. It's like swapping lyrics to your favourite song. You still tap your foot, even if the meaning has shifted. In fact, some parish priests quietly mutter old Latin prayers under their breath, while reading the official English text aloud. The ambiguity is by design. Everyone hears what they want and Elizabeth lets them, but you can also sense the danger humming beneath it. For hardline Protestants, the so-called Puritans, the settlement feels like cowardice, a betrayal of true reform. For staunch Catholics, it feels like heresy in disguise. Elizabeth shrugs off both sides with regal detachment, as if daring them to blink first. She doesn't bow to Rome, but she doesn't let Protestant firebrands dictate policy either. Her tightrope walk continues, every step measured, every glance calculated. The human side of it is almost comedic. Imagine Elizabeth attending chapel. She insists on crucifixes at the altar, then listens to Protestant sermons railing against idolatry. She wears richly embroidered vestments, while reformers grumble that she looks like a papist queen. It's like hosting a dinner party where half your guests want steak and the other half demand salad, and you serve an oddly seasoned stew that satisfies no one, but no one storms out either. There's even a fringe rumour, half believed, half joked about, that Elizabeth herself secretly tilted Catholic in her private prayers, bowing to old rhythms when no one was watching. Others swore she was a closet Calvinist, carefully hiding her radicalism. The truth? Probably neither. But the whispers revealed just how slippery her middle path was. Everyone projected onto her the faith they either hoped or feared she had. Through it all, you can feel Elizabeth's steel. She smiles, she jokes, she flirts with foreign ambassadors, but she never ever lets go of the reins. To balance religion in England isn't just a matter of policy, it's survival. If she goes too far, Protestant Spain might invade. If she leans too Catholic, her Protestant nobles might rise. So she stands firm, choosing the narrow ridge where compromise, however uncomfortable, becomes the foundation for peace. And you, trailing in her shadow, realise this isn't weakness. It's the most daring gamble of all, not to crush one side or the other, but to keep them both tethered just enough to her throne that they can't tear the kingdom apart. You find yourself in Westminster, 1559, where oak benches creak beneath the weight of lords and bishops, their breath misting faintly in the cold air as arguments sharpen like knives. This is where the act of supremacy is born, and you feel the hush as Elizabeth's voice drifts across the chamber. Her words are deliberate, every syllable polished like a gemstone, and yet beneath the elegance lies iron. She declares herself the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, a title chosen with almost mischievous care. Now you might wonder why not Supreme Head, the same title her father took. Here's the trick. Head would provoke outrage from Catholics who argued only Christ could hold that role, while Governor sounded humbler, more administrative. Think of it like ordering a decaf coffee at midnight. You still get the caffeine of control, but it looks softer on the menu. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's wording was an act of deep conviction or pure political sleight of hand. Either way, it worked. Parliament passed the Act, and her crown tightened its grip over pulpit and parish. You can almost hear the scribes scratching down each clause. Clergy and royal officials now had to swear the oath of supremacy, acknowledging Elizabeth's authority over the church. For many, it was a formality. They muttered the words and kept their jobs. For others, it was betrayal. A handful of bishops refused outright and lost their seats. A few priests vanished into the countryside, whispering Latin prayers in hidden chapels. The atmosphere buzzes with tension, like a tavern right before a brawl breaks out. And yet Elizabeth, seated on her throne, doesn't flinch. She knew some resistance was inevitable. Losing a few bishops was, in her mind, a small price to pay for stability. Besides, their empty seats could be filled with loyal men more willing to bend. You picture her twirling that thought like a coin between her fingers, subtraction by addition. At the same time, you see her cunning in action. She avoids outright persecution at this stage. No mass burnings, no iron-fisted crackdowns. She's walking the same tightrope, but now the rope stretches through the vaulted roof of Parliament itself. Her councillors grumble on either side. Some Protestants want harsher penalties for recusants, those who refuse the oath. Some Catholics hope the Pope will intervene. Elizabeth listens, nods, and then coolly chooses the middle course. The quirky part: some clergy who swore the oath found cheeky ways around it. They'd mumble under their breath, "Supreme Governor, of temporal things only," inserting tiny disclaimers in Latin. Technically, they were obedient. Spiritually, they winked at Rome. Elizabeth probably knew, but she didn't press too hard. It's like watching kids sneak candy into class. You sigh, but you let it slide as long as they stay quiet. Meanwhile, ordinary people down in the villages shrug. They've been forced to swap allegiances so many times under Henry, Edward and Mary that another oath feels like one more costume change in a never-ending play. A farmer trudges to church, mutters the words, then goes home to supper. What matters to him is the harvest, not whether his monarch is called head or governor. Still, the consequences ripple outward. Across Europe, Catholic rulers frown. Philip of Spain, who once courted Elizabeth, bristles at her audacity. The Pope, still nursing grudges from Henry's break, waits like a cat at the edge of the room. You can almost sense Elizabeth's amusement at their indignation. She had outmanoeuvred them with a single word: governor. It's political judo, flipping the weight of opposition back onto itself. But don't mistake her wit for weakness. When enforcement was necessary, she made sure the machinery of law was ready. Commissioners travelled the country to administer the oath, their parchment scrolls unrolling like banners of loyalty. Some churches grumbled, others complied reluctantly, and a few resisted in hushed defiance. Yet the act stuck, stitched into the fabric of Elizabethan governance. And here's the open debate that lingers. Did Elizabeth truly believe she was God's chosen instrument to lead the church, or did she wear the role like a costume, using religion as a tool of monarchy? Historians lean both ways. Perhaps the truth is that she believed just enough, that faith and pragmatism, for her, were two sides of the same gilded coin. You catch her smile as she leaves the chamber, skirts whispering along the stone floor. To the crowd outside, she appears serene, almost amused, as though she's thinking, that wasn't so hard. But you and I know better. Every oath sworn is a thread pulled tighter on the loom of rebellion. Every bishop dismissed is a new enemy waiting in the shadows. The act of supremacy might have secured her crown, but it also sharpened the daggers that would one day be aimed at it. Still, in this moment, Elizabeth has won. She has bent the will of Parliament, secured her authority over church and state, and planted her flag in the shifting sands of religion. For a queen barely settled on her throne, that's no small feat. You lean back, listening to the echoes of that vote, and realise the middle way isn't just talk anymore, it's law. You step into the hushed air of a parish church, sunlight pooling through high windows dusted with centuries of soot. The wooden pews creak beneath parishioners who don't quite know what to expect, and you watch as a priest, slightly nervous, flips open the newly issued Book of Common Prayer. This slim printed volume is more than just a manual for Sunday services. It's Elizabeth's attempt to bind a fractured kingdom with ink and ambiguity. The Book of Common Prayer wasn't brand new. It had been through two earlier versions under Edward VI, but Elizabeth's 1559 edition carried subtle changes that spoke volumes. Communion, for instance, had been a theological battleground. Protestants said it was symbolic. Catholics swore it was Christ's literal body and blood. Elizabeth's solution, a brilliantly vague phrase that could mean either, depending on what you wanted to hear. You can almost picture her smirking at the double meaning, take, eat, this is my body. Feed on him in your heart by faith with thanksgiving. It's the religious equivalent of writing a horoscope, satisfyingly broad, open to interpretation. As you lean closer, you notice how the prayers sound, familiar enough for Catholics to recognise, but streamlined in English for Protestants to embrace. Gone was the ornate Latin liturgy that had dominated for centuries. Instead, a rolling rhythm of English phrases, poetic but plain, filled the air. It was the language of taverns and kitchens, the voice of everyday England. And yet some priests still muttered Latin under their breath, as though adding subtitles for the faithful who missed the old tongue. The book also included morning and evening prayers, psalms and collects, set forms that gave services a reliable structure. For common folk, this was both comforting and confusing. On one hand, they finally understood the words spilling from the pulpit. On the other, the changes made them wonder, had God's will really changed this quickly? A grandmother who remembered chanting Latin hymns now sat beside her grandson, who belted English prayers with gusto. Two generations divided by a single book. Quirky tidbits abound here. In some villages, parishioners turned the old Latin missals into scrap paper, used for shopping lists or even to line pie tins. Imagine baking an apple pie on top of parchment once considered sacred scripture. It's the kind of irony that history loves to serve hot, but the real brilliance of the Book of Common Prayer was its built-in flexibility. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth intended the ambiguities to soothe Catholics, or whether she simply wanted wiggle room to adjust later. Whatever the motive, the effect was clear. Each side could claim partial victory. Protestants boasted that the service was in English, Catholics clung to the familiar cadence, and both trudged home vaguely satisfied or equally annoyed. You picture the scene on an ordinary Sunday. A farmer, his boots caked with mud, kneels stiffly as the priest recites the new prayers. His wife whispers along, enjoying the plain English. An old neighbour frowns, missing the mystery of Latin. Overhead, the bells toll as though nothing has changed. Life carries on, even as eternity is debated line by line. Of course, not everyone was fooled. Hardline Protestants grumbled that the book was too Catholic in tone, its vestiges of ritual a stumbling block to true reform. They wanted plain pulpits, not ornate altars. They wanted sermons as stark as black coffee, not prayers dressed up with incense. On the other side, Catholics muttered that the book was heretical, a slap in the face of centuries of tradition. Yet Elizabeth held firm, refusing to rewrite. She understood that perfect satisfaction was impossible. What mattered was quiet obedience. And there's another layer here. The aesthetics. Elizabeth insisted on beauty and worship. Candles, crucifixes and vestments remained, despite Protestant complaints. She knew the theatre of religion mattered. Faith wasn't just doctrine, it was performance, atmosphere, spectacle. A congregation lulled by stained glass and music was less likely to rebel than one stirred by fiery sermons. Sometimes, as you follow Elizabeth through her chapel, you catch her humming during the hymns. She wasn't a theologian in the way her advisors were, she was an artist of politics. The Book of Common Prayer was her script, and the realm her stage. Yet beneath the poetry, danger lurked. For those who refused the book, fines loomed. Attendance at church was mandatory, at least outwardly. Spies noted absences and recusants. Those who clung to the old Catholic rites were quietly flagged. The compromise was fragile, like a vase glued together after a fall. Lovely at a glance, but one hard knock away from shattering. Still, in the flickering light of that village church, you feel the quiet triumph of Elizabeth's gamble. Ordinary people left with prayers they could understand, melodies they could hum, and rituals that looked both old and new. For a kingdom weary of flames and martyrs, it was enough to get through another Sunday without panic. And so, with a slim book and careful wording, Elizabeth steadied her people's souls just enough to keep the peace. You wander now into a quieter chamber, where bolts of silk and wool are stacked like trophies, and bishops argue not about theology, but about clothing. Yes, clothing, the vestments controversy, where hems and sleeves became battlegrounds for the soul of the church. You can almost laugh, because after all the bloodshed and bonfires, here you are watching men scowl at each other over whether a surplice is too papist or just plain practical. Elizabeth, ever the performer, understood the power of costume. She insisted her clergy wear the traditional white surplice and other vestments that looked, to many reformers, suspiciously Catholic. To her, these garments weren't about doctrine, they were about dignity, about ensuring that worship looked orderly and majestic. She wanted the church to feel grand, a spectacle that reassured people this was still the faith of kings and queens, not some stripped-down sermon in a barn. But the Puritans grumbled. To them, every embroidered sleeve smelled of Rome. Every ruffle was a betrayal of true Protestant simplicity. You picture one fiery preacher wagging his finger at a reluctant clergyman. Take off that surplice. God sees through your lace. The poor priest, sweating under candlelight, wonders if he's going to be dragged into court over what amounts to a holy fashion show. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth pushed the vestments issue out of vanity or strategy. Was she genuinely invested in liturgical clothing, or did she simply enjoy keeping Puritans in their place? After all, her reign is full of moments where she played cat and mouse with factions, giving them just enough rope to argue, but never enough to hang her authority. There's a quirky detail worth savouring. Some clergy refused to wear the vestments outright, and were hauled before church courts. Instead of quietly complying, they made a spectacle of their defiance. One minister in London, for example, stripped down to plain black gowns and called the surplice a rag of Rome. Another preached so fiercely against vestments that his parishioners heckled him mid-sermon. Imagine church services where the real drama wasn't the scripture, but whether the preacher's collar was 2 inches too wide. Elizabeth, meanwhile, watched with her usual patience. She rolled her eyes at Puritan nitpicking, remarking once that these precise fellows were more trouble than they were worth. To her, the argument was almost laughable compared to the real threats. Foreign invasion, papal excommunication, assassination plots. Still, she didn't dismiss it entirely. Clothing mattered, because appearances mattered. She knew that a priest in proper vestments looked authoritative, and authority was half the battle, so she doubled down. In 1566, the Archbishop of Canterbury issued the advertisements, enforcing uniformity of clerical dress. Those who refused risked losing their posts. Elizabeth wanted no confusion. Her church would look consistent from Dover to Durham, no matter what fiery preachers muttered. And yet, the controversy didn't vanish. The Puritans continued to needle her, arguing that if she truly wanted reform, she should cast off every shred of Catholic tradition. They wanted bare walls, no music, no candles, just scripture and stern sermons. Elizabeth refused. She liked her crucifixes, her choir boys, her shimmering altar cloths. To her, stripping worship of beauty was like stripping the crown of jewels. You don't inspire loyalty with plain wood and silence. Meanwhile, the common folk mostly shrugged. A farmer's wife trudging into church likely didn't care whether the priest wore a surplice or a black gown. She cared about whether her child's fever broke or whether her husband's crops survived the frost. To most parishioners, the vestments controversy was just another high-born squabble that trickled down in confusing rules. Still, you notice how this fight reveals something bigger: Elizabeth's refusal to let anyone, Puritan or Catholic, dictate her policy. She set the tone, she set the dress code, and she would not budge. Even clothing became a stage on which she acted out her authority. And there's almost a wry humour in the fact that Elizabeth herself was the most theatrical dresser of all. She appeared in dazzling gowns of cloth of gold, encrusted with pearls, her ruffs so wide they seemed to float around her head. The very queen who insisted her clergy wear modest vestments was also a walking jewel box, but that was the point. Her radiance, her majesty, her performance, all of it reminded her subjects that religion and monarchy were inseparable. So as you leave that candlelit chamber, you can't help but smile. In Elizabeth's England, the balance of faith could hinge not just on books and oaths, but on the cut of a sleeve. You step quietly into the nave of a parish church, the stone floor cold beneath your feet, and you notice something odd. On the surface, everything looks orderly. Prayers in English, clergy in their appointed vestments, the Book of Common Prayer clutched in hands. But as you sit among the congregation, you hear murmurs, tiny Latin phrases whispered under breaths, and see fingers crossing themselves at moments when they shouldn't. These are the church papists, Catholics who outwardly conformed but inwardly clung to their faith. And around them, like shadows among the pews, sit Elizabeth's spies. The Queen's government quickly realised that enforcing conformity wasn't as simple as passing acts. Faith is slippery. It hides in gestures, in whispered prayers, in the heart's stubborn refusal to obey. So she leaned on men like Sir Francis Walsingham, her spy master, to watch, to listen, to record. You feel their presence in the back row, stern men with notebooks, noting who skipped services, who fumbled through the new prayers, who looked just a little too devoted to the old ways. Some recusants, those who outright refused to attend the mandated services, were fined. At first, the penalty was modest, almost symbolic. But repeat offenders faced harsher consequences. It wasn't about crushing faith in private, it was about maintaining public order. As long as you showed up, muttered along and looked obedient, the Crown tolerated your private doubts. Elizabeth, with her sly smile, had no interest in windows into men's souls, but she absolutely cared about windows into men's wallets, because fines were a neat way to remind dissenters who ruled. Historians still argue whether this tolerance was genuine moderation or just cold pragmatism. Did Elizabeth truly believe people should worship as they pleased in private, or did she simply lack the resources to enforce deeper conformity? The debate continues, but as you watch her govern, it's clear that she prized stability above purity. To her, obedience was enough. True belief was optional. And yet, there's a quirky, almost theatrical side to this cat-and-mouse game. In some towns, recusants would sneak to secret masses at night, leaving faint trails of candle wax on barn floors. Neighbours whispered about priests disguised as gardeners, slipping through hedges with chalices tucked under cloaks. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's agents reported back with relish, writing letters full of coded names and strange symbols. It's like an Elizabethan spy thriller unfolding in every parish. One story tells of a recusant family who covered their dining table with food on Sundays, claiming they couldn't attend church because they were too busy hosting guests. The neighbours, of course, knew better. Another tale speaks of priests saying mass in cellars while lookouts stood above, whistling at the first sign of constables. Religion had become a cloak and dagger affair, played out in whispers and shadows. For Elizabeth, this underground defiance was both a nuisance and a danger. Too much leniency, and Catholics might grow bold. Too much pressure, and she risked rebellion. So she balanced, as always, hovering between firmness and restraint. She fined, but she didn't always imprison. She spied, but she didn't burn. Compared to her sister Mary's fiery persecutions, Elizabeth's approach seemed almost merciful. Almost. And you can feel the irony. Her own government officials sometimes doubted whether the Queen herself was secretly sympathetic to Catholicism. After all, she still loved crucifixes, still tolerated music and ritual in her chapels, still looked regal in gowns that could have graced a Catholic procession. To her Protestant critics, this was infuriating. To her Catholic subjects, it was a glimmer of hope. Elizabeth let both sides wander because ambiguity was her shield. But the tension kept building. The papacy had not yet formally excommunicated her, so many Catholics argued they could, in good conscience, obey her laws while quietly keeping Rome in their hearts. It was a fragile peace, like a glass goblet carried across a bumpy road. Everyone knew it could shatter with one papal decree. Meanwhile, ordinary villagers made their compromises. They showed up at church, bowed at the right moments, then went home to whisper rosaries in secret. A farmer might hide a small statue of the Virgin in his barn loft, while his children recited the Lord's Prayer from the new book at school. England lived in this double world, public obedience, private resistance, under the watchful eyes of spies and informers. And in this uneasy dance, Elizabeth managed to keep the realm mostly quiet. Her genius wasn't in erasing Catholicism, but in containing it, holding it just tightly enough that it couldn't boil over, but not so tightly that it burst in rebellion. The pews looked peaceful, but behind the prayers lay a kingdom of secrets. Night settles over the English coast, the sea rolling black and silver under a hidden moon. You hear the scrape of oars in the distance, a small boat cutting through the surf, carrying men cloaked in shadow. These are Jesuit priests, slipping ashore with the daring of smugglers, their mission not to peddle contraband but to keep the Catholic faith alive. You watch them carry bundles wrapped in cloth, not barrels of wine, but chalices, vestments, and forbidden texts. The tide washes at their boots as they melt into the hedgerows, vanishing like foxes into the night. By the 1580s, the religious settlement that Elizabeth had crafted was being tested like never before. England's Catholics, long torn between outward conformity and inward devotion, now had champions who risked everything to minister to them. Men like Edmund Campion and Robert Persons crossed the Channel in disguise, often dressed as merchants or scholars, their Latin prayers hidden under chatter about wool prices. To the government, these priests were not just clergymen, they were foreign agents, potential traitors, instruments of Rome. And in a way, they were, because their very presence encouraged Catholics to resist, to whisper, to dream of a day when England might return to Rome. The government responded with severity. New laws branded the harbouring of a priest as treason. If you offered food or shelter to one of these missionaries, you could face the noose. Homes of recusant families were searched, walls tapped for hollows, floors probed for secret trapdoors. And sure enough, carpenters sympathetic to the faith began building priest holes, tiny hidden chambers inside manor houses where a man could crouch for hours, even days, while pursuivants searched above. You picture one now, a cramped, airless cavity behind a chimney, barely big enough to kneel in, where a priest clutches his rosary in the dark as boots stomp overhead. It's a strange and almost cinematic moment in history. Faith lived out as espionage. Children were trained to stand at doors and sing loudly if soldiers approached, masking the sounds of a hidden mass. Messages were written in code, symbols scrawled in margins, letters passed hand to hand. Historians still argue whether most Catholics supported these daring priests, or whether many quietly resented the trouble they brought, since harbouring them risked the entire household. But the drama they introduced was undeniable. One quirky story tells of a priest disguised as a travelling musician, carrying a lute case not filled with strings but with missals and chalices. Another speaks of Jesuits dressing as horse traders, chatting cheerfully in marketplaces while plotting where next to celebrate Mass. You half expect to hear them mutter, "The owl hoots at midnight," like characters from a spy novel centuries too early. Elizabeth's spymaster, Walsingham, sharpened his network during these years. His agents infiltrated recusant households, posed as sympathisers, even attended clandestine services only to betray those present. The stakes grew ever higher. Torture chambers in the tower were readied, racks and manacles gleaming in torchlight, as captured priests were pressed for names. Some broke, others went to their deaths with quiet dignity. The air itself seemed to hum with secrecy and fear, and yet Elizabeth herself, though stern, sometimes hesitated to unleash the full weight of persecution. She preferred fines and pressure over mass executions. Still, as more priests arrived, more plots against her life were uncovered. To her, every Jesuit stepping ashore looked less like a shepherd of souls and more like a dagger pointed at her throne. The ordinary Catholic family was caught in the middle. Imagine being a farmer's wife in Lancashire, hosting a secret mass in your barn. Your children keep lookout at the lane. Your husband lingers by the hearth ready to distract visitors. The chalice gleams faintly in the candlelight as the priest whispers Latin prayers, the congregation of 10 or 12 kneeling in straw. It's a scene of devotion, but also of peril. At any moment soldiers could burst in, and the cost would be ruin, fines, or worse. Meanwhile, Protestants muttered angrily about treachery, pointing to every whisper of mass as proof that Catholics were plotting rebellion. The suspicion poisoned communities, turning neighbour against neighbour. A man's absence from church might spark gossip that spiralled into accusation. Elizabeth's England became a land of masks where truth and loyalty were never clear. And here lies the paradox you feel in the cold night air. The more Rome sent priests to fan Catholic devotion, the more England hardened against them. The underground mass that kept faith alive also deepened suspicion and fueled harsher laws. It was a cycle that neither side seemed able or willing to break. Still, as you follow one of those shadowy figures through a dew-soaked field, you can't help but admire the courage. Whether misguided or not, these men risked everything to serve their flock. Their footsteps on English soil echo like drumbeats of defiance, each one reminding Elizabeth that her settlement was never fully secure. You feel the tremor ripple through England in 1570, when parchment from Rome arrives like a thunderclap. Pope Pius V issues the papal bull regnans in excelsis, a decree that does more than criticise Elizabeth. It excommunicates her, strips her of legitimacy, and most dangerously absolves her Catholic subjects from loyalty to her crown. It's as if a spiritual earthquake rumbles under the island, shaking the fragile scaffolding she had built with her settlement. Until now, many Catholics in England had lived in uneasy compromise. They dutifully attended Anglican services, whispered rosaries at home, and hoped Elizabeth's toleration would hold. But with one papal stroke of ink, obedience to her laws became sin, and rebellion became righteousness. Imagine being a Catholic yeoman in a northern village. Yesterday, church attendance was survival. Today, it's betrayal of your faith. The bull turned private conscience into public treason. Elizabeth, of course, does not crumble. You see her receive the news with her typical calm, though you can almost sense her jaw tightening. She knows this decree is not just words, it's an invitation for plots, for uprisings, for foreign invasion. In her council chamber, her advisers bristle. Some demand harsher laws, others whisper of purges. Elizabeth listens, then quietly sharpens her balance again. Historians still argue whether the bull backfired by making life worse for English Catholics. Before 1570, many could justify obedience as loyalty to their monarch. Afterward, they were branded traitors in their own country, suspected of harbouring papal sympathies at every turn. Elizabeth's government responded with stricter recusancy fines and an increased reliance on spies. To her, the bull had confirmed what she always feared. Rome would never leave her in peace. There's a quirky twist in how the bull actually reached England. Couriers tried to nail copies to church doors in London, but authorities quickly tore them down. One poor fellow caught posting the decree in the city was dragged before officials and nearly lynched by a furious crowd. The document was supposed to embolden Catholics, but its circulation became a risky business. You almost imagine underground pamphlets being passed like contraband, folded into loaves of bread or tucked inside shoe soles. The bull also emboldened rebels abroad. Philip II of Spain, already sour at Elizabeth's Protestant leanings, saw fresh justification for intervention. Catholic nobles in the north of England grew restless, murmuring about restoring Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's cousin, and in Catholic eyes the rightful heir. You can almost hear conspiratorial whispers in drafty castles. If Elizabeth is no longer queen in God's eyes, then why not remove her altogether? For Elizabeth, the challenge was not just religious, but personal. The bull painted her as a heretic, a pretender, even an enemy of God. Imagine being told that your very soul, your crown, your identity, had been publicly disowned by the highest religious authority in Europe. Lesser monarchs might have collapsed under that weight. Elizabeth instead stood taller. She doubled down on her image as God's chosen ruler of England, playing to the pageantry of divine favour. If Rome cast her out, she would stand as England's protector against Rome, and yet the danger was real. Assassination plots multiplied in the following years, some backed by Spanish gold, others by zealous English Catholics who believed killing her was an act of piety. Elizabeth's household tightened its guard. Her meals tasted for poison. Her chambers watched for intruders. A queen who once seemed untouchable now moved under constant threat. You feel the air around her grow tenser, every shadow a possible dagger. Still, she did not retreat into paranoia. Instead, she leaned on her tools of ambiguity and performance. She continued to attend services rich with music and ritual, letting her Catholic subjects hope she wasn't their enemy, even as her laws hardened. She smiled, she joked, she dazzled ambassadors. But beneath it all, the papal bull had redrawn the lines. Elizabeth was no longer a monarch merely balancing factions. She was now officially a heretic in Rome's eyes, a target painted in scarlet letters. The irony? The bull, meant to weaken her, may have strengthened her in the long run. Many English Catholics, forced into an impossible choice, gradually drifted toward conformity, unwilling to risk their estates or lives for a pope across the sea. The settlement hardened, the crown's grip tightened, and Elizabeth's image as a queen under siege rallied Protestants to her side. So you stand with her in that tense year, hearing the murmur of courtiers, the scratch of quills drafting new laws, the whisper of priests in hiding. Above it all, Elizabeth holds her composure. Her tightrope has narrowed, the stakes are higher, but her balance remains steady. You stand now on the blustery cliffs of southern England, the wind whipping salt spray into your face, and you see sails swelling on the horizon, dark shapes that grow with each wave. The Spanish Armada, Philip II's grand crusade, is bearing down on Elizabeth's kingdom like a thunderstorm rolling across the sea, and at its heart lies religion. This isn't just politics or trade, it's holy war, framed as God's judgment between a Protestant queen and a Catholic king. Philip of Spain had been Elizabeth's brother-in-law once, husband to her sister Mary. He had even courted Elizabeth briefly, back when diplomacy still danced between them. But after the papal bull excommunicated her, his patience dried up. To him, Elizabeth was not a legitimate monarch but a heretic sitting on a stolen throne. The Armada was his chance to crush Protestant England, restore Catholicism, and secure his empire's dominance. In 1588, the spectacle begins. You picture galleons towering with gun ports and bristling with soldiers, stretching in a crescent across the channel. English watchers ring church bells, light beacon fires on hilltops, and whisper prayers as the news spreads. This is no minor skirmish. It's a clash that could decide the island's fate. You almost expect the very clouds to part with angelic choirs, so grand is the propaganda on both sides. Elizabeth, though, doesn't hide in palaces. You see her ride out to Tilbury dressed in gleaming armour, her red hair blazing like a torch against the grey sky. Her speech to the troops becomes legendary. "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." The soldiers cheer, their fear tempered by her courage. Historians still argue whether every word of that speech was actually hers or polished later by courtiers, but the effect is undeniable. She becomes a symbol of Protestant defiance, a living saint in armour, and then comes the battle. English ships, lighter and faster, dart around the lumbering Armada, firing, retreating, harrying the Spanish like gnats around a bull. At Calais, fireships are launched, empty hulks set ablaze and sent drifting into the anchored Spanish fleet. Imagine the chaos. Sailors screaming, anchors cut in panic, galleons colliding in the smoke. The Armada scatters, its perfect crescent shattered. A quirky, almost comical detail emerges in the chaos. Spanish sailors, desperate for supplies, carried more priests than surgeons. They were better prepared for confession than for cannonballs. Bread grew mouldy, water fouled, morale sank. Meanwhile, English sailors dined on salt fish and beer, hardly gourmet, but enough to keep them fighting. Logistics, more than theology, tipped the scales. Storms did the rest. As the battered Armada limped north around Scotland and Ireland, gales smashed ships onto rocky coasts. Survivors crawled ashore only to be captured or killed. Of the 130 ships that set sail, barely half returned to Spain. For Philip, it was a disaster cloaked in excuses. He muttered that he had sent his fleet against men, but God sent them against the weather. For Elizabeth, it was Providence itself, proof that heaven favoured her reign. Back in London, celebrations burst forth. Medals were struck with the words, "God blew," and they were scattered. Sermons rang with triumph. Plays and poems immortalised the victory as divine endorsement of Protestant England. You can almost hear Elizabeth back in her palace, allowing herself the smallest smile. The Armada's failure had secured her image forever as a queen chosen by God to defend her people, yet the victory wasn't absolute. Catholicism in England didn't vanish with the Armada. Priests still crept ashore, masses still whispered in barns, recusants still paid fines. But the momentum shifted. The Spanish menace had been the great hope of English Catholics who longed for Rome's return. With its collapse, Elizabeth's settlement seemed stronger, more permanent, almost inevitable. And there's another layer. The Armada gave Elizabeth not only security but also theatre. Her image at Tilbury, in armour and with fire in her voice, became legend. She wasn't just a ruler balancing religion anymore. She was the embodiment of England's faith, a Protestant warrior queen wrapped in silk and steel. That image, whether or not every word of her speech was authentic, became as powerful as any law or prayer book. You leave the cliffs with the echo of the waves still in your ears, knowing the Armada was more than a battle. It was the moment Elizabeth's balancing act turned into triumph. Her careful compromises, her patience, her defiance, they all crystallised here, against the backdrop of storm and flame. You turn from the foaming sea back toward the pews, and right away you feel a different wind blowing. Not from Spain this time, but from within. The Puritan push. If Catholics tug on Elizabeth's sleeve to restore the old church, Puritans tug the other way, begging her to strip it all down to bone and Bible. You walk beside the Queen through corridors humming with petitions and pamphlets, and you hear the same refrain over and over. More preaching, plainer worship, fewer vestments, no kneeling at communion, no sign of the cross, ditch the surplice, goodbye crucifixes, thank you and God bless. It's as if half the realm wants to redecorate the sanctuary with nothing but a wooden table and a very enthusiastic sermon timer. Elizabeth listens and smiles her cat smile. She knows zeal when she hears it. She's been living in a choir of zeal for decades. The Puritans, many of them shaped by exile in Geneva or Frankfurt during Mary's reign, come home armed with Calvin and confidence. They press Parliament to further reform the settlement. They want Presbyterian church governance instead of bishops, stricter Sabbath observance, a worship service paired to the essentials, and clergy chosen for preaching power rather than the look of their sleeves. You can almost see Elizabeth's eyebrow climb at no bishops, because those bishops are not just spiritual ornaments, they're pillars that keep the royal roof from sagging. Bishops mean hierarchy, and hierarchy means control, her kind of control. So she does what she does best, she holds the line. When members of the House of Commons float bills to remodel the church, she blocks them. When a few fiery preachers rail at popish rags, she lets Archbishop Whitgift, the tough new enforcer, issue articles demanding conformity. The advertisements you watched back in the vestment scuffle weren't a one-off. Now Whitgift's subscription tests make clergy sign onto the prayer book and the 39 articles, or risk losing their pulpit. It's not subtle, it is effective. On Sundays you walk into country churches and find the same settled scene. English prayers, a set liturgy, music, thank you very much, and a minister who, whatever his private views, knows the Crown prefers order over improvisation. Puritans fume that the Reformation has stalled. To them, England is halfway through a haircut and the barber quit for lunch. Some push for prophesyings, gatherings where ministers practice preaching to sharpen doctrine. Elizabeth, wary of unsupervised microphones, shuts many of them down. She isn't against preaching. She's against letting a side channel become a rival stage. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth overreacts to Puritanism or simply recognises a political threat disguised as piety. From her vantage point, bishops are instruments of the crown, an episcopal spine that keeps the church upright and loyal. From the Puritan vantage point, bishops look like holdover furniture from a Romish living room, polished, expensive, and in the way. You feel the impasse. One queen defending the architecture of authority. One movement yearning to replace pillars with a network of elders and synods. And then there are the pamphlets. the Elizabethan equivalent of a spicy comment section. Late in the 1580s, the anonymous Martin Marprelate tracts pop up, roasting bishops with jokes so sharp they almost clatter on the floor. Imagine satire written after too much ale and a little Geneva boldness. Bishops skewered as pompous, corrupt, anti-gospel. It's funny, until it isn't. The Crown, already touchy about order, goes on the hunt. Presses are seized, printers chased, warrants waved like fly swatters. Somewhere a Puritan wit, quill still wet, hears boots in the lane and decides today's a fine day to learn sprinting. Quirky parish behaviour adds texture to this tug-of-war. A few congregations start to improve their worship, sliding furniture, lowering candles, trimming music. In one town, a zealous churchwarden reportedly removed the communion rail as if it were a trip hazard to holiness, only to find the archdeacon reinstalling it on inspection day. It becomes a game of liturgical musical chairs. Take it down, put it up, take it down, surprise visit, put it up fast. Meanwhile, the average parishioner just wants the sermon to be short enough that the Sunday stew doesn't burn. 3 light jokes per 1,000 words? The Puritans would prefer 3 points per sermon and a 4th, use, for application. Elizabeth's restraint still surprises you. She could crush dissent more brutally, but she rarely does unless loyalty falters. Her patience has limits, though. When Thomas Cartwright, a brilliant Cambridge man, champions Presbyterian order against bishops, university authorities silence him. When John Field and Thomas Wilcox publish the admonition to the Parliament demanding radical changes, they end up in trouble. The message is crisp: preach the gospel, fine, unhinge the settlement, no. Think of it as the Queen's version of a terms of service update. Violations result in content removal and temporary account suspension. Yet the Puritan energy doesn't vanish. It flows through households, lecture circuits and classes meetings, semi-secret networks of ministers. Picture late-night gatherings where men whisper over Bibles annotated into hedgehogs of marginalia. They pray for a day when Parliament, under a godly wind, will finish the work. Some look abroad, admiring the Dutch or the Scots. Others imagine a future king, say, a learned James from the north, who might be more amenable. They aren't wrong to think succession matters. The Queen grows older, and policy can outlive monarchs. Your ear catches a mainstream fact that anchors this moment. By the later years of the reign, fines for recusancy harden against Catholics, but disciplinary machinery also tightens around non-conforming Protestants. The same state that fought the Armada now polices pulpits to keep England one book, one liturgy, one crown. It's a strange symmetry. Left and right alike find the via media a narrow road with speed limits, and the pulpit jokes practically write themselves. One conforming minister quips that some brethren would outlaw organ music even in heaven. A zealous neighbour mutters that heaven won't have organs, only psalms sung on pitch. You smile, remembering our earlier dinner party stew. Elizabeth still serves the same compromise dish, and everyone claims it's oversalted by the other side. The Queen's own chapel remains your favourite callback. Remember the crucifix that made reformers twitch? It still gleams. Remember the choir that charmed her? It still sings. She understands the soft power of sound and sight, how beauty wins loyalty when argument fails. You walk out of service with the melody in your head and realise that in the fight between less and more, she is choosing enough. Does it work? Mostly. The realm doesn't split. Parish life continues. Children memorise catechisms, markets bustle, sailors sign on for voyages, and playwrights, one young fellow from Stratford among them, begin to test stories on stages that the churchmen occasionally side-eye. Underneath, however, the Puritan strain keeps humming, a low drone that will swell in a later generation. For now, Elizabeth's hand keeps the faders where she wants them. Bishops up, Presbyterians down, prayer book centred. You leave a vestry meeting where a curate, pen hovering over a subscription form, finally sighs and signs. He wants his living. His parish wants peace. The Crown wants uniformity. In that single scratch of ink, the settlement lives another day. You glance toward Whitehall and imagine the Queen at her window, watching the river fold light into ripples. She has outlasted Spain, stared down Rome, and now, without shouting, she outlasts her own most zealous friends. A quieter victory, but a victory all the same. You drift from vestry to playhouse, and the air changes, less incense, more sawdust and orange peels, because now the faith fight wears grease paint. You wander London's Bankside where a crowd sways like wheat, craning to see players strut across a timber stage. If the pulpit is where England is told what to believe, the theatre is where it's shown whom to love. Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth a symbol, haloed not with saints' bones but with spotlit myth. You feel it the instant a trumpeter blares. This is propaganda, but it's velvet-gloved and catchy enough to hum on the walk home. Before the first line lands, you've already met Elizabeth in 50 masks. Poets turn her into an allegory of order. Painters airbrush her into eternity. And civic pageant masters choreograph entire riverbanks to cheer at the right beat. On royal progresses, those summertime roadshows where the court eats noblemen out of house and larder, towns build triumphal arches, cue choruses of schoolchildren and thrust up allegorical figures who speak in hexameters. A truth in gauze thanks heaven that England is safe. A piece in blue assures you the harvest will be fat. You smile, remembering our dinner party stew. This is Elizabeth's favourite recipe. Different ingredients, same comforting dish. A mainstream fact anchors you. Religious mystery plays had been clamped down since mid-century, and the master of the revels policed scripts, so overt theology gives way to allegory. Theatres learn a trick, praise the Queen, hint at religion, never name it. The result is sly, saints exit, personifications enter. One day you watch a pageant where a living hedge, 2 page boys in shrub costumes bless them, parts to reveal Astrea, the long-vanished goddess of justice returning in Elizabeth's reign. The message is clearer than stained glass. The gods approve this settlement. The heavens, like London, are Team Liz. Then comes Edmund Spenser with the Fairy Queen, an epic thick enough to prop a wobbly table, casting Elizabeth as Gloriana and as Belphoebe. Chaste, radiant, peril approved. You turn the pages and feel the nation's insomnia ease. Dragons are Catholic enemies, the knight's virtue is Protestant moderation, and the Queen is both prize and compass. Historians still argue whether Spenser's adoration springs from genuine devotion, or from an author's shrewd understanding that flattery pays better than patrons with empty purses. Either way, the poems do political heavy lifting, teaching you to love the via media without making you read a statute. Portraits finish the spell. You stand before canvases where Elizabeth's face barely ages, a porcelain moon above jewelled constellations. Painters use a mask of youth, a standardised pattern passed around workshops so the Queen stays ageless, while courtiers add symbols, a sieve for chastity, rainbows for concord, pearls for purity, a tame ermine for justice. A quirky tidbit slips in. The Privy Council eventually orders unflattering likenesses destroyed. No more experimental realism, thank you, because policy is fragile and wrinkles don't help. Art obeys. The rainbow portrait even stitches eyes and ears across her gown, a wink to surveillance and a callback to those pew-side spies you met earlier. The message is lullaby soft but iron hard. The Queen sees, the Queen hears, and somehow the Queen never sleeps. You remember Tilbury, the armour, the speech, and watch as printers mint it into legend. Then jewellers strike medals that read, in a gust of divine side-eye, that God's winds scattered the armada. Sermons echo the chorus. Playwrights recycle it as stage thunder, and civic banquets plate the message in sugar. Literally. At masks, confectioners sculpt subtleties. Sugar castles, sugar virgins, sugar mottos, so you can eat your propaganda with your pudding. If you've ever wanted your politics dusted in powdered sugar, congratulations. Elizabethan England is your buffet. Inside the playhouses, wit slips past censors like a fox through hedgerows. A clever clown cracks a line about governing hearts without making windows, and the groundlings roar, because you and I know that window joke by now. A gallant sighs that true harmony is a mean between extremes, and your neighbour nudges you. There's the settlement again, hiding in a love scene. You start to realise the Crown's greatest stage is not Whitehall, but your imagination. Make the balance beautiful, and you'll forgive its edges. Not that everything runs on rails. Pamphlet wars flare. The Martin Marprelate satires lampoon bishops. Poets risk towing lines so fine they need a surveyor. Companies get shut down for overboldness. The master of the revels blue pencil scenes. Historians still argue whether censorship smothered genuine religious drama, or saved a tired nation from reigniting old fires. You watch a scene quietly trimmed. A sermonish rant sanded into a joke about bad ale. Frankly, you prefer the joke. Like joke 1, if a monologue can be cut to time your Sunday stew, the theatre has done you a kindness. Progresses churn more pageants. In one town, a mechanical dragon belches perfumed smoke, only to be tamed by a maiden in white who bears, surprise, the Queen's device. In another, a boy dressed as a miniature England presents a golden key the size of a loaf of bread. You grin, it's over the top, but that's the point. Politics here is a bedtime story with special effects. The Queen is harmony, you are safe, now please sleep. Light joke 2. The dragon's smoke smells suspiciously like last year's incense. Some supply chains never change. Coinage and costume join in. You finger a new shilling with the Queen's ageless profile. You admire a procession of courtiers wearing Tudor rose badges like walking billboards. Heralds chant long genealogies until you could swear time slows. Then the accession day tilts thunder past. Annual tournaments where knights in cloth of silver crash lances, while poets declaim virtues in ruffs big enough to land small birds on. Each tilt is a moral, bravery, temperance, loyalty, all orbiting Elizabeth like planets around a careful sun. You catch yourself humming the tune from her chapel again, remember that choir, and realise the melody has followed you into the lists. Does the theatre change hearts? Mostly, it calms them. When plots rattle windows and priests hide in walls, this pageantry persuades you that moderation is not compromise but magic. It turns statutes into stories, fines into choruses, spies into embroidered eyes. A mainstream fact floats back. By the 1590s, the Privy Council tightens portrait control and place censorship, even as the cult of the Virgin Queen peaks, proof that the more brittle the balance, the brighter the lights must blaze. Light joke 3. It's not easy being ageless. Somewhere an overworked portraitist is repainting the same cheekbone for the 15th time. Yet a question lingers in the hush after the applause. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth truly believed the sacral glow around her, whether the virginity, the goddess returns pageants, the rainbow sleeves, felt like destiny, or whether she rode the myth the way she rides everything else, with a steady hand and a shrewd eye for the next scene change. You watch her bow on a musk's dais, pearls trembling, and you can't quite tell. Maybe that's the genius. If you can't separate faith from theatre, the audience stops trying. They go home murmuring lines about peace and order, and the realm sleeps. As you leave the playhouse, the Thames breathes mist, lanterns bob on wherries, and the city hums through its curfew. You taste sugar on your tongue, smoke in your hair, a chorus still ringing in your ear. The settlement holds another night, not because everyone agrees, but because everyone can picture the same queen at the centre, ageless, listening, balanced on that tightrope between bonfires, while the crowd, lulled by music and myth, decides to believe for one more day. You leave the playhouses and drift back into cottages and taverns, the places where belief isn't argued so much as kneaded into the day's bread. It's Sunday morning, and you follow smoke up from a thatch where a mother ties her apron and shoes children into best clothes. The father pats pockets for the coin that will rattle into the poor box, and a grandmother, who remembers Latin the way you remember a lullaby, traces a tiny, furtive cross on the baby's cap before anyone sees. Then you all tramp to church, boots thudding, bells clanging a rhythm that has survived kings, queens, and 3 different versions of the service. Inside, you breathe polish and beeswax. The big English Bible, set out by injunctions long before Elizabeth and still chained in pride of place, glows in the window's light, and a few boys test the chain with a tug, as if the word might try to wander off. The minister begins morning prayer from the Book of Common Prayer, and you feel the realm's compromise settle over the pews like a quilt. English words, steady cadences, a psalm to sing from Sternhold and Hopkins. The Psalter every household seems to hum, whether they want to or not. That's your mainstream fact for the morning. Metrical psalms, printed cheap and carried in pockets, turn living rooms and lanes into low-key choirs. Look sideways, and you'll catch the blend. One woman bows her head at the holy name with the old reverence. A young man, fresh from hearing a hot sermon in the next market town, keeps his hat off but his spine stiff, determined not to look papistical. Children mouth the Lord's Prayer in English, and later at home, their grandmother whispers Nav in the dairy with the milk pails for company. Historians still argue whether this obedience is heartfelt or simply survival, whether by 1603 England is genuinely Protestant in its bones. or a nation of skilled performers hitting their marks for the constable. You wander out after the final Amen and trail families back to kitchens where pottage blips on the hearth. On the settle sits a dog-eared primers, prayer manuals now in English, its woodcut saints half scratched by a child with a pin. Catechisms get recited between stirring pots and shooing chickens. A father quizzes on the 10 Commandments, a mother hums last week's psalm while counting eggs, and there, quirky tidbit incoming, you notice someone has saved a scrap from an old pre-Reformation service book to line a pie tin. The Latin rubric now keeps blackberry from sticking. It's both irreverent and weirdly tender. Yesterday's holy page doing today's humble work. Like joke 1, when your recipe calls for a generous sprinkling, you did not expect it to be with the Athanasian Creed. Not every parish tastes alike. In the north, a squire who remembers Mary's days pays recusancy fines rather than appear at church. His tenants do a half curtsy to the law and then slip to a barn at dusk for a whispered rosary. Elsewhere, a godly clothier hosts a weeknight exercise, neighbours reading scripture till candles sputter. The constable peeks in, counts heads, decides the stew at home needs him more and leaves. The law is the same, but the enforcement is as local as weather. You sit in a pew through a long sermon and learn the art of dignified dozing. Eyes forward, mind drifting like a wherry on the Thames. A boy drops a psalter. It bangs like a drum. Someone in the gallery sings a harmony that surprises even the sparrows in the rafters. After at the churchyard, the talk is less about predestination and more about sheep, rents, and who will brew for the next church ale. Those ales, parish fundraising feasts with music and games, still crop up despite frowns from the stricter sort. They keep roofs mended, bells hung, and tempers smoothed. You may not settle doctrine with a tankard, but you can buy new pew cushions, which is the next best miracle. Like joke 2, blessed are the cushion makers, for they shall shorten the sermon. Weekdays weave faith into chores. You watch a housewife chalk a text over the hearth, serve the Lord with gladness, then use the same chalk to mark a cupboard that sticks. A shepherd sings metrical psalms to match his stride. A spinner keeps count with Gloria Patri on her lips. Market stalls sell chapbooks with prayers, proverbs, and the occasional fighting rooster printed in wobbly ink. A few households hang prints of the Queen, the Virgin Queen, above the settle. Others keep a tiny painted Lamb of God tucked in a chest. Nobody advertises the clash. They live around it. Enforcement hums in the background like that fan you turned on at the start. Steady, not shrieking. By statute you owe attendance. Miss often enough and the fine stings. In 1581 the penalties for persistent recusancy climb dramatically. £20 a month can break a lesser gentleman. And you feel the mood shift. Some families bend. A few go to ground. Parish clerks keep registers of baptisms, marriages, burials, careful script that turns lives into lines. When the Queen's commissioners ride through, the minister has answers ready, the wardens produce accounts, and the parish chest yields its papers with the creak of a conscience examined. There's comedy in the crevices. A cat naps on the cushion of the bishop's visitation chair and will not be moved, thereby demonstrating an early form of episcopal independence. Two neighbours argue whether to sing fast or slow and compromise by singing loudly. A boy sent to ring the Sanctus bell, now just a bell, pulls with such zeal he nearly exits the belfry through the roof, then reappears pink-faced and sanctified by embarrassment. Like joke 3, if zeal were a rope, England could tow the Armada home for parts. But beneath the humour, you sense how deftly Elizabeth has tuned this everyday faith. She doesn't make windows into souls, she makes doors into Sundays, easy to open, hard to slam. Beauty remains, music, candles, the steady shape of prayer, while doctrine is kept to a lane broad enough that most can walk without tripping. A mainstream anchor holds. The 1559 Act of Uniformity still frames attendance, and the 39 articles printed and preached fence in what's taught without fencing out half the nation's habits. The Queen's preference for order over inquisition lets parish life grow like ivy, crooked, adaptable, rooted in old walls but reaching for new light. And the scholarly quarrel doesn't fade. Historians still argue whether the Protestantization of village piety is deep by Elizabeth's last years, or whether, as some insist, late medieval devotions persist under English skins, resurfacing whenever the watchman blinks. You walk away from one cottage where a psalm is sung to the creak of a cradle, then pass a barn where a secret candle gutters over bread and wine. The truth, like most of Elizabeth's reign, lives in the middle distance. At dusk, you sit on a low wall by the church and listen. A mother repeating the catechism, a fiddler tuning for the church ale, the clerk locking the parish chest, the bell giving one soft note as if clearing its throat for tomorrow. The settlement doesn't thunder here. It murmurs. It keeps stews from burning by ending service on time. It keeps neighbours nodding rather than snarling. It keeps a realm of small homes pointed, however imperfectly, in the same direction. You breathe the mingled smells of yeast, smoke, and rain, and realise that in England theology survives by learning the tune of ordinary life, and ordinary life, in turn, learns to sing in key. You notice the air grow thinner in the late 1590s, like a candle end guttering after a long feast. The pageants still glitter, the portraits still swear she never ages, the choirs still hang notes in the rafters like silver thread, but you feel the strain beneath the lace. Elizabeth is in her 60s now, the progresses shorter, the court quieter when she rises, the sharp wit intact but the steps slower. The settlement you've watched her balance for decades begins to tremble at the edges, not from one blow, but from 1,000 small pressures. War-drained coffers, bad harvests, faction fights, and the question everyone whispers but no one dares say near her chair: who comes next? The war with Spain didn't end with those scorched hulks we watched run for the Irish rocks. Raids and counter-raids drag on, privateers chase prizes, and soldiers tramp off to campaigns that look glorious in pamphlets and muddy in boots. The treasury wheezes. Poor harvests in the mid-90s bite hard. Prices climb like ivy, and parishes stretch arms until the purse seams complain. In one village, a clerk records 3 families living on broth and God's mercy, which is to say, thin. Your mainstream anchor settles in. Parliament in 1601 erupts over monopolies, those crown-granted privileges on things from salt to starch, which piled high in lean years feel to many like toll booths on the road to supper. Elizabeth reads the room. She stages one of her greatest scenes, the Golden Speech. You picture the Commons packed, men leaning forward as she promises to prune abuses and declares her love for her people with the warmth of a hearth in November. The room melts, some weep. The moment lands like a benediction. The oratory is real, but so is the message behind it. She knows the compact must be tended, not merely enforced. A queen cannot live forever on old victories. Sometimes she has to make new peace with hungry bellies. Light joke 1. If speeches added calories, the 1590s would have been plumper. But speeches cannot feed armies, and Ireland pulls like a lodestone. The 9 Years' War drags English troops across bog and bramble, where victories win headlines and losses win funerals. Essex, dashing, restless, and increasingly allergic to taking advice, rides into the Irish thickets with more confidence than plans. You stand in council chambers and feel the temperature drop between his faction and the Cecils. The Queen still adores theatre, but not when the script runs off stage. Essex disobeys orders, parleying when he should press, then bolts back to London without leave, bursting into her chamber unasked. Bad move. The thunderclap is swift. House arrest. Offices stripped. Pride splintered. He will gamble again, and London's lanes will see a small shambolic rising in 1601 that ends at a scaffold. You remember Tilbury's steel and realise mercy has limits, especially when pretenders try stage managing the Queen. While great men duel with quills and warrants, the pews do what pews always do. They endure. Fines for recusancy still bite Catholics. Bishops still nudge Puritan preciseness back inside the lines. But the mood is thinner, the tolerance tighter. Some justices press harder, a few step back, counting the cost in neighbours' faces. You pass a manor where a priest hole, once a secret whispered over candles, now feels like a relic of a younger fear. Still used, still dangerous, but haunted by the knowledge that no Spanish sails crowd the horizon anymore. A grandmother still scratches an ave over bread. A grandson sings a psalm from memory and complains it has too many verses. Tell him to count the 10 Commandments for perspective. The compromise lives, but it creaks like an old bridge in wind. Succession is the wind. Elizabeth will not name an heir. Perhaps because naming is conceding. Perhaps because naming is danger. Perhaps because the right ambiguity holds factions in orbit. Historians still argue whether she shunned the question out of principle, prudence, or pride. Whatever the route, silence breeds industry. Courtiers peer north at James VI of Scotland. Protestant, learned, Tudor by blood through Margaret, and very interested in an English welcome. You catch whispers in corridors, letters folded small, coded compliments sent across the border. Robert Cecil threads the needle, keeping the Queen's dignity bright while ensuring the candle doesn't go out in the dark. It is the purest Elizabethan solution. Say little, arrange much. In the margins you notice the quirky detritus of a long reign. The Mask of Youth portraits lean ever harder on alchemy, painting time into truce. Courtiers swear the Queen's complexion is moonlight, though everyone knows the moon is made of Venetian ceruse. She smiles despite aching teeth. The sweet tooth of England is dawning. Some ladies blacken theirs to match her fashion, talk about loyalty, and still dances the memory of a galliard with her hands when the feet protest. The chapel music remains luminous, and you hear again that old line, no windows into souls, now a refrain more than a policy, a signature hummed at the edge of every dispute. Like joke 2, if no windows, at least the draught is manageable. The theatre keeps the incense of flattery burning, but its laughter is quieter. The Privy Council's scissors snip more briskly. Unlicensed presses do more scurrying than printing. At the same time, a certain playwright becomes quite busy turning daggers and kings into riddles for audiences who prefer their politics wrapped in iambic paper. You stand in a gallery and think, the country has learned her trick. Say much with symbols, little with names, keep the stew from burning. On cold nights she walks the galleries, that locket ring with its mother's portrait warm against her skin, and you remember how this started. Anne's shadow, the oath's careful wording, the crucifix that stayed, the spies at the pews, the fireships at Calais, the Marprelate snickers, the psalms in kitchens, the fines, the sugar pageants, the rainbow portrait with its many eyes. A life's worth of balancing acts, each one stitched to the next until they form a garment strong enough to wrap a quarrelsome island. The weight tells now. She has outlived so many. Dudley, Walsingham, Burleigh, Mary of Scotland, whose death still pricks at the conscience like a pin swallowed by the heart. On certain anniversaries the court grows hushed, and the Queen stares a little longer at the river. You hear a rumour from the shires, a parish where the church ale was cancelled 3 years running because there was nothing to brew and less to celebrate. Yet in another, a new bell is raised with a rope of smiles. England remains what it has been under her, never uniform, always gathered. The 39 articles still fence the field, the book still orders mornings and evenings, the fan hum of enforcement still hums. But nothing feels as inevitable as it did after Tilbury. Age makes even victory a softer pillow. In 1601, after the Golden Speech eases Parliament's temper, you watch her step down with that little sideways smile, the one that says she knows exactly how the scene will be remembered. Still, the actors change around her. Younger men fill offices, old ones turn to portraits. The river keeps flowing past Whitehall, and you think of time as a procession. Some wave, some bow, some look away, and the Queen, still centred, still luminous, stands a little longer at the window. Like joke 3, the window has no view into souls, but it does look out on the barge schedule. What remains most fragile is what has always been most powerful. The choice to call compromise a virtue. You feel nerves twitch when a curate trims a ceremony a shade too far, when a justice ignores a recusant's absence because the harvest failed, when a pamphleteer tests the censor with a metaphor shaped like a key. Yet the centre holds, not by crushing but by insisting, quietly, stubbornly, that ordinary people can keep walking to church, keep singing in kitchens, keep bowing to a crown that gives them a service they understand and a peace they can live with. Near midnight, as candles snap and gutters hiss, you trail Elizabeth through the privy garden. The air smells of wet boxwood and old roses. She pauses, and you hear the faintest echo of Tilbury in her breath, steel under silk, even as the body tires. She will not name the next hand that steadies the rope, but she keeps walking it chin high until the last step is hers and hers alone. The settlement shivers, yes, but it does not fall. Not yet. Not on her watch. You stand with Elizabeth at the edge of her reign, and you feel how the balance she's kept, one foot on ritual, one on reform, keeps humming after her pulse slows. The candle gutters in March 1603, and the island inhales, waiting to see if the rope she walked will snap without her. It doesn't. News rides north like a hawk. James VI of Scotland is now James I of England, the crowns yoked on one head. That's your mainstream anchor. Succession lands without civil war, and the religious scaffolding Elizabeth raised stays standing. You can almost hear the Queen's last smile in the quiet. The stagehand slips out, but the set remains. You take a step into those first Jacobean mornings, and notice how Elizabeth's fingerprints cling to everything. Bishops stay. The Book of Common Prayer stays. Parish registers keep marching, line by line, baptising and burying and marrying the same stubborn English. James experiments, calls a conference at Hampton Court, listens to Puritan petitions, then famously quips, "No bishop, no king," a line so neat you could embroider it on a kneeler. Quirky tidbit. He actually enjoys theological arguments so much he sometimes treats councils like after-dinner debates. Courtiers learn to bring both Bibles and patience. Like joke 1, if salvation came by footnote, James would have cornered heaven's margin trade. Through it all, your ear keeps hearing Elizabeth Middleway. The 39 articles fence the field. The surplice still itches a few necks. Recusancy laws still pinch. And yet the parish bell goes on ringing people toward a liturgy they understand. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth forged a truly Protestant nation by 1603, or left a stage where the actors played along until new directors arrived. But the habits she planted, English prayers, steady forms, bishops loyal to the crown, become the bones James builds on. Even the King James Bible, a few years off yet, grows from the same impulse. Give people a single ordered text, stately enough to sing in kitchens. The legacy runs in two channels, and you walk both. On one side, moderation becomes identity. The English learn to be religious without constantly reaching for torches. They learn to complain in pamphlets and obey in pews, to lace jokes through doctrine and lace doctrine through dinner. Think of the way metrical psalms trot alongside ploughs, how church ales fix roofs, how a chorister's descant smooths a quarrel you never quite hear. On the other channel, the settlement hardens certain lines. It keeps bishops as a royal backbone, it keeps fines as a spur, it keeps Catholics at a permanent arm's length. The island sleeps more, bleeds less, but it never fully stops murmuring, and you can't help turning the diamond in the light to count its flaws and fire. Was it tolerance or strategy? Mercy or thrift? Did she keep crucifixes and choirs because she loved beauty, or because she knew politics tastes better with sugar? Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's private devotion leaned towards ceremony or cool, humanist reserve. She left almost no windows into her soul, only the silhouettes we walked beside, the rainbow portrait with its seeing eyes, the Tilbury armour with its thunder, the locket ring with her mother's face, policy and memory braided till you can't tell which strand holds tighter. Like joke 2, if ambiguity were taxable, the Exchequer would have retired early. Move your gaze from palaces to parishes, because that's where legacy actually lives. A child born in 1602 grows up thinking prayer in English is normal. Bishops are as ordinary as mayors, and the Queen's choir is what angels aim for. His grandmother still mutters an Ave in the dairy, but she also teaches him the creed from the catechism. In one town the wardens still fight over how loudly to sing. In another, a recusant gentleman pays fines like rent for his conscience. The priest hole, that cramped lung behind the chimney, remember creeping past one, doesn't vanish, but it becomes less a promise of rescue and more a fossil of fear. The underground remains, but the ground above it belongs to a settlement that proved the island could share a pew without sharing a theology down to the last comma. You pause at the book edges of her story and glimpse the next chapters. James will keep bishops and print a Bible. His son will fight parliaments. Zeal will grow sharp again, and that rope you've been watching will snap in a century's storm. But without Elizabeth's long lesson in restraint, the snap might have come sooner, with more fire and less music. Her achievement isn't that she solved England, it's that she taught it to live with a problem without burning down the house every Sunday. Like joke 3, the sermons may still run long, but at least the stew doesn't always scorch. What's settled then? A habit, a tone, a way of saying the law is this wide and your soul is your business, a way of making the crown look like a conductor rather than a drill sergeant, a way of teaching that beauty pacifies nerves better than shouting. You can track it in the portraits that refuse to age, in the progresses that fed whole counties, in the statute that mandated attendance but not intrusive confession, in the patient smile that told Puritans not so fast and told Rome not at all. It's messy by design. It held because people could breathe inside it, and you threading back through all we've seen, find yourself again at that first coronation, smelling wood smoke and feeling the ground still warm from bonfires past. A young queen steps into impossible weather, and instead of praying for a single wind, she learns to trim sails. She outlives her enemies, outlasts her friends, and leaves you a craft more than a creed. The art of balance as governance, of ritual as glue, of ambiguity as peace. Whether you call it prudence or grace depends on which hymn you hum home. But when the bell rings for evening prayer in a little church with a cat in the bishop's chair and a choir boy off the beat, you realise her settlement is still singing. Not flawless, not final, but enough. Word count 1, 2. Let the noise fade now. Let the galleries empty, the pageants fold their painted cloth, the beacons along the cliffs wink to black. You breathe slower, as if the Thames itself is setting your lungs a gentle pace. Out with the tide, in with the tide. Quiet, unhurried, kind. You picture a small parish door easing shut, the latch finding its familiar groove, a last note from the choir hanging like a speck of dust in candlelight, and then settling on the sill. The Queen steps away, and the stage grows still. You follow the outline of her legacy the way a fingertip follows wood grain. A line that wavers, a knot that resists, a surface warmed by generations of hands. You remember the armour at Tilbury, the careful word governor, the book whose pages turned in kitchens as often as in chancels, the priest holes breathless dark, the sugar castles that melted into laughter, the portraits that promised a forever no face can keep. All of it drifts wider, softer, like a town under gentle snow. Now loosen your shoulders, smooth the thought lines at your brow, and let the night tilt you toward rest. Somewhere, a bell gives one courteous stroke for Compline. Somewhere a cat settles on a worn cushion of velvet and dust. Somewhere a child drowses to a psalm that doesn't need a perfect key to be perfectly enough. The arguments recede to the edges, where even sharp words grow rounded like stones tumbled a long time in water. You are safe on the bank while history's river goes by, a slow silver ribbon, unknotted and patient. Breathe with it, in and out. Let the light thin to a hush, and the hush open like a door. You can step through whenever you like. The rope holds, the house stands, the stew for once will not burn,